I wish I could say I knew something was wrong from the start. Maybe that would make it easier to live with myself, to live with what happened to Laura. But the truth is, I didn't. It felt normal, exciting even, to finally move into our own place, just the two of us. No more noisy roommates, no more renting. It was supposed to be a fresh start. You don't expect something as simple as a piece of paper to ruin your life. But the moment we found those blueprints, everything changed. I still see it when I close my eyes. That room, those walls, the things we weren't supposed to find. Sometimes I wonder if Laura saw it coming. I wonder if she knew before I did that we weren't safe. I tell myself she didn't feel anything at the end, but that's a lie too. She was smart, smarter than me. She probably figured it out long before I did. And by then, it was already too late. The house was nothing special, at least not at first glance. A single-story ranch built sometime in the 1970s with a sagging porch and an overgrown lawn. But for Laura and me, it was perfect. We weren't looking for much, just something we could afford, somewhere we could build a life together. When the realtor showed us the house, we couldn't believe our luck. It was under budget, structurally sound, and only needed minor cosmetic fixes. "It's a steal," Laura had said, running her fingers along the scratched kitchen counter. I remember standing in the living room, imagining how it would look once we added a fresh coat of paint and new furniture. It was easy to overlook the little things, the outdated fixtures, the creaky floorboards. The realtor said the house had been vacant for a while. The previous owners moved out in a hurry, she explained vaguely. Nothing sinister, just personal reasons. I didn't think much of it at the time. We moved in on a chilly Saturday in early November. The air was crisp, and the trees lining the street were bare, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Unpacking took longer than expected. Laura was methodical, carefully placing each box in its designated room, while I worked on assembling furniture and cursing under my breath when the screws didn't fit. It wasn't until the second day, while Laura was organizing the closet in the guest room, that we found it. "Hey Sam," she called. "Come look at this." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over. She was crouched on the floor, her head tilted as she studied something inside the closet. "What is it?" I asked. "Help me move these shelves." We slid the heavy wooden shelves aside, revealing a small gap in the drywall. Inside was a rolled-up piece of yellowed paper, brittle and covered in dust. "What the hell?" I muttered, pulling it out. We unrolled the paper on the floor. It was a blueprint, an original layout of the house, complete with measurements and annotations. At first, it seemed like a cool bit of history, a relic left behind by the original builder. But as we studied it, something didn't add up. "Look at this," Laura said, pointing to a section near the back of the house. "This room isn't on the current layout." I leaned closer. She was right. The blueprint showed an extra room, tucked between the master bedroom and the laundry room. A small square labeled storage. "Maybe they remodeled," I suggested. "Maybe," Laura said, but her tone was skeptical. The idea of a hidden room was oddly thrilling at first. Laura and I spent the rest of the afternoon searching for it, tapping on walls and peering behind furniture. "Do you think it's still here?" Laura asked as we stood in the laundry room, staring at the far wall. "If it is, they covered it up pretty well," I said, running my hand along the drywall. It was Laura who found the first clue. She noticed that the baseboard near the corner didn't line up perfectly with the rest of the room. "Grab the crowbar," she said. We pried off the baseboard, revealing a small gap in the wall. It was barely big enough to fit my hand through, but when I reached inside, I felt the smooth, cold surface of metal. "It's a door," I said, my heart pounding. It took us nearly an hour to break through the wall. Behind it, we found a rusted metal door, the kind you'd expect to see on a fallout shelter. "Why would someone seal this off?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. The door wasn't locked, but it took all my strength to wrench it open. The hinges groaned in protest, and a foul smell wafted out like damp earth and decay. Laura gagged. "What the hell is that?" The room was small and windowless, with concrete walls and a dirt floor. It was empty, except for a single wooden chair in the center, its legs splintered and uneven. But what caught my attention was the writing on the walls. Someone had scrawled words and symbols into the concrete, deep gouges that must have taken hours to carve. Most of it was illegible, but a few phrases stood out. "They're always watching. Don't trust the blueprints. It's not what it seems. This is creepy," Laura said, stepping closer to the chair. "Maybe we shouldn't be in here," I said, my voice shaky. But Laura wasn't listening. She was staring at the floor beneath the chair, where the dirt was uneven, like it had been disturbed recently. "Sam," she said, "we need to leave." After that day, something changed between us. Laura became distant, spending hours locked in the guest room poring over the blueprints. I could hear her muttering to herself, scribbling notes in the margins. "What are you looking for?" I asked one night, standing in the doorway. "There's more," she said, her eyes wide and frantic. "This house, it's wrong. The blueprints don't match the walls, Sam. There are spaces that don't make sense, gaps that shouldn't exist." "You're scaring me," I said. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn. "I think someone built this house to hide something." I woke up one night to the sound of something scraping against the floor. I found Laura in the living room, dragging the coffee table aside and pulling up the rug. She had a hammer in one hand and a flashlight in the other. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "There's a hatch under here," she said. "I saw it in the blueprints." "Laura, stop," I said, grabbing her arm. She shook me off. "You don't get it, Sam. We're not safe here." "Then let's leave," I shouted. For a moment she froze. Then she looked at me and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "We can't," she whispered. Laura was right. There was a hatch under the rug, hidden beneath a thin layer of plywood. I wanted to ignore it, to nail it shut and forget it existed. But Laura insisted we open it. "This is the last piece," she said. "If we figure this out, we can leave." The hatch led to a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air was damp and heavy, and the flashlight cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. Laura went first, her movements slow and deliberate. I followed, my heart pounding with every step. The tunnel ended in another small room, this one filled with shelves lined with jars. At first I thought they were empty, but as I stepped closer, I realized they weren't. Each jar contained a Polaroid photo, faded and curling at the edges, photos of people. Laura picked up one of the jars, her hands trembling. "It's the families," she said, "the people who lived here before us." Before I could respond, I heard the sound of footsteps behind us. "Run!" Laura said. I didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled back through the tunnel, the sound of footsteps growing louder. By the time we reached the hatch, Laura was gasping for breath, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Go," she said, shoving me toward the stairs. "What about you?" I asked. "I'll hold them off," she said. "Laura, go." I didn't look back. The police didn't believe me. When they searched the house, they found nothing. No hidden room, no hatch, no jars. They said Laura must have run off, that the stress of the move had gotten to her. But I know the truth. Laura didn't run, she didn't leave. She's still in that house, somewhere in the walls, and sometimes when it's quiet, I swear I can hear her voice. It's been 6 months since that night, and I still can't bring myself to drive past the house. The police investigation went nowhere. They chalked everything up to stress, an overactive imagination, and maybe a touch of guilt. They even suggested Laura might have staged her disappearance to escape the pressure of the move. I stopped listening after that. Laura wouldn't do that. She wouldn't just leave me. Would she? Sometimes I wonder if the police are right. I wonder if I imagined the footsteps in the tunnel, the photos in the jars, the writing on the walls. Grief does strange things to people, and I've spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, questioning my own memory. But then I remember the fear in Laura's voice, the urgency in her eyes, The way she told me to run, even when she could have gone first. She knew something I didn't. And whatever it was, it got her killed. I've tried to move on, but the house won't let me. I've been keeping track of it, checking online listings and local records. So far, no one else has moved in. It just sits there, empty, with its sagging porch and peeling paint, like a wound that refuses to heal. I've thought about going back, breaking in, searching for answers, but every time I get close, I freeze. My chest tightens, my palms sweat, and I can't breathe. So I've turned to other methods. I've been combing through archives at the library, pulling every document I can find about the house. Permits, blueprints, property transfers. Most of it's routine, but there's one detail I can't stop thinking about. In 1994, the house was sold to a family named the Coopers. They lived there for 8 years before selling it to another family. Neither family left behind much of a paper trail. No photos, no interviews, not even a forwarding address, except for one thing. Buried in a stack of inspection reports, I found a handwritten note from a city official. Unexplained damage in the basement. Advised not to seal the walls until further notice. The date on the note was July 16, 1999. The same day a missing persons report was filed for the Cooper's youngest son. I knew it was a mistake the moment I parked outside. The house looked even worse than I remembered. The windows were grimy, the gutters overflowing with dead leaves. A for sale sign leaned crookedly in the front yard, half hidden by overgrown weeds. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to. Not for Laura, or for closure, or for any noble reason. I just couldn't live with the questions anymore. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, my shoes crunching on the layer of dirt and debris that had settled on the floor. The air was cold and stale, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in every corner. The house felt smaller than I remembered, like the walls had closed in on themselves. I made my way to the laundry room, my hands trembling as I pushed aside the warped plywood that covered the hatch. The hinges groaned as I lifted it open. The tunnel was just as narrow and claustrophobic as before, but this time, the silence was worse. My breathing echoed off the walls, and every step felt like a betrayal, like I was disturbing something that wanted to be left alone. When I reached the end of the tunnel, the jars were still there. Most of them were covered in dust, their contents murky and indistinct, but a few looked fresh, as though someone had been here recently. I picked up one of the jars and held it to the flashlight. Inside was a Polaroid just like before, but this one wasn't of a family. It was a picture of Laura. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. She was sitting in the wooden chair in the sealed-off room, her hands bound behind her back. My stomach churned and I dropped the jar, the glass shattering at my feet. That's when I heard it. A faint creak, like the sound of someone shifting their weight on the dirt floor. I turned, my flashlight darting across the room. The shelves were empty now, the jars gone. And then I saw her. It wasn't Laura, not really. She was sitting in the chair just like in the photo. Her clothes were the same, her hair disheveled and matted with dirt. But her eyes, they were empty, hollow. "Laura?" I whispered. She didn't move. I took a step closer, my heart hammering in my chest. "Laura, it's me. It's Sam. I'm here." Her head tilted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment I thought she was going to respond. But then I heard the footsteps behind me. I turned, my flashlight catching the briefest glimpse of a figure in the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing what looked like a mask made of cracked porcelain. The flashlight slipped from my hand, plunging the room into darkness. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was in the room, my legs frozen in place, and the next, I was clawing my way up the tunnel, my hands scraping against the rough walls. I burst into the daylight, gasping for air, and ran to my car without looking back. I drove for hours, my mind racing with fragmented images. The jars, the photo, Laura's lifeless eyes. I haven't gone back since. The house was condemned a month later. I saw it in the local paper, a small blurb buried on the second to last page. But there was one detail that stopped me cold. The article mentioned a team of workers who'd gone inside to inspect the foundation. They found the hatch in the laundry room, along with the tunnel beneath it. They also found something else. Buried in the dirt at the end of the tunnel were dozens of Polaroids. Most were too damaged to identify, but one was still intact. It showed me. Standing in the doorway of the sealed-off room, holding a flashlight, with Laura sitting behind me in the chair. The timestamp on the photo was from the day after I escaped.